We're so unique sexually, but with media, it makes everyone feel like we're all supposed to orgasm the same way, have sex the same way, have the same type of relationship. And if you go out of that box, that's where that inner conflict comes in.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dear Family, the podcast. This is episode number 66, and truly every week when I hit publish, I am just so grateful that I have an opportunity to continue to share my message of love and understanding and getting us to talk about the importance of our mental health and finding mental wellness. And I hope that these stories I'm bringing you are pushing you to find inspiration, have those difficult conversations that you might not have. On the other side of those difficult conversations are understanding and love and compassion. And only by talking and communicating can we get there. And that's exactly what Nina Cudney, my guest, is doing. And I'm really excited to bring her to you. She is so real, and I know you're going to love her. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing and writing those 5-star reviews and sharing this podcast with your loved ones, your dear friends, and your dear family. And also for following me on all the social media platforms. That's Right Now Rachel, right with a W. I'm also so grateful to have the opportunity to be able to go into schools, virtual forums through NAMI. Last week, I was able to speak to a school district, and I got to speak to principals and counselors and parents and teachers. We are continuing to have, again, those difficult conversations about suicide, depression, and anxiety. The good news is there's hope. And by talking about this and recognizing signs early, we can take care of it. That brings me a lot of optimism. Thanks so much for going on this journey with me. It means a lot. Nina Cudney is a certified sex coach, speaker, and writer on mental health and sexuality. She also writes erotica and sex toy reviews. She's unfiltered, unashamed, and willing to show how completely imperfect she is, which allows her clients to open up and have the important, uncomfortable conversations that surround sex and sexuality. The shame and guilt that can come from body image issues, religious beliefs, media images, past trauma, and toxic messages are replaced with a radical self-acceptance to live authentically, especially in intimate relationships. Our mental health and sexuality are closely related. Nina shines a light on the most taboo aspects of being human that our culture continues to perpetuate. Her non-judgment and open-mindedness come from decades of dealing with her own emotionally paralyzing, intrusive thoughts from obsessive compulsive disorder that began in her childhood. Years of therapy, the right medication, and compassion for herself have helped her get past the fear and embarrassment surrounding her OCD, allowing her to be fearless when she speaks unabashedly open about sex while getting others to do the same. You will appreciate the practical advice Nina offers to kindle any relationship and to increase your self-esteem in the bedroom and beyond, because sexy is an attitude. And you will love how she opens up and tells for the very first time a truly personal family story about the immense impact her parents' divorce had on her as an adult and the happy ending with her officiating their wedding years later. Nina lives in Connecticut with her husband and 2 children and absolutely loves what she does for a living. Anyone who is lucky enough to get real with Nina knows that the uncomfortable conversations she may push you to have will give you the courage to not only find pleasure, but happiness. Welcome, Nina. I'm so happy to have you on
Thank
Dear
you.
Family. We met through our mom's mutual friend, Ruth, who I sometimes call Priya. Priya and your mom, Judy Cohen-Fernetti, and my mom, Lori Callan-Schwent, all went to high school together in Scarsdale. And Priya said, you have got to meet Nina.
Aw.
She is sharing publicly about mental health issues. She connected us and we've been following one another ever since on social media. I love what you are doing. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really had the same kind of introduction behind your back about you as well. My mother was like, Nina, Lori's daughter, Rachel, she's a writer. You hadn't had the podcast at that point. This was a while ago. And you were writing and you have to connect with her. She talks all about mental health. She's a huge advocate. So I was like, okay, cool. And then you had just started your Dear Family podcast. And in a very short, I mean, to me, it's short. To you, it probably feels like forever. A very short time. I'm seeing the guests you have on here. This is impressive.
You're so sweet. Well, you're one of them. Nina, this is a podcast about our complicated but wonderful family. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about you and your family?
My parents have been married for 40 some odd years. A brief break towards the end there, but we could talk about that in a bit. And I have an older sister. Super, super tight family. I think both of my parents came from families that were old school. They didn't really talk, communicate about much. Both of my parents, whether subconsciously or not, decided they didn't want that for their family. I would go out on a limb here and say we should have had more boundaries than we did, but it's who we are. Those lack of boundaries and that over communication has saved us all, actually, throughout the last 40 years. I've been married for about 15 years. We've been together for about 17. I have 2 children. I have an 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son.
Your husband's a teacher, correct?
Yes.
What grade does he teach?
He teaches K through 4 phys ed. Can you imagine teaching phys ed remotely?
Wow, especially the little ones.
Right.
He doesn't need a drink at the end of the night. And you have kids at home too who need help. This is a challenging time. We all are dealing with it differently. You are currently in what part of Connecticut?
New Milford, Connecticut. More people have heard of Danbury, Connecticut, which is the closest city, about maybe 20 minutes from me.
We're going to go back to your childhood. You dealt with OCD and you called it disturbing OCD because it would actually paralyze you. You felt like you wanted to die because the thoughts were so intrusive. It filled you with so much shame. Mm-hmm. And the thoughts, they came back again as an adult. And it threw off your sleeping and it pushed you to lose interest and focus and feel disconnected from your family. Clearly, OCD really wreaked havoc. Can you tell us about your journey with OCD and why you now call it an expected brain gift?
I'll be honest with you, out of all the things I talk about, Rachel, this is the toughest. And I think because it's so personal, but I'm here, I've realized now to be open about this. It's a mental illness that very few people have, about 1% to 2% of the population. So there's not a ton of us, but definitely enough that it's worthy of explaining truly what the disorder is all about.
I think that's a big percentage, actually.
Yeah, compared to depression or anxiety.
Right. There's varying degrees of OCD too.
Very much so. People now use it as an adjective, like, oh, I'm so OCD, or, oh, you're a germaphobe. It's used as an adjective. I am not sensitive about it. I understand people who are, but the way I heal is through humor. I heal from making fun of myself. I understand that it's not funny in and of itself, but the way I personally heal is through sarcasm, self-deprecating humor. That's just my style. So growing up with OCD in the 80s, I was born in 1980. No one really knew anything about it. I wasn't diagnosed until high school. And that was an interesting process. Even going back to about 3 years old, which I don't remember, but this is what I've been told, I was showing symptoms of intrusive thoughts. And I would tell my parents that I heard voices. Now, as a child, it wasn't voices as in schizophrenia. The only way I could verbalize these intrusive thoughts that I certainly wasn't choosing to make, it had to have been somebody else. It was never any kind of hallucination or audio, nothing. It was literally just the thought was not mine. And it certainly was not welcome. I had, looking back, very textbook, right? So typically people with intrusive thoughts with OCD struggle with thoughts of harming themselves or other people, sexually, just like scary thoughts. Contamination obviously is a big one. People have no problem saying I'm a germaphobe. Oh, I have to wash my hands 100 times a day. There's not as much shame in that versus I had this horrible thought that I wanted to hurt somebody that I love, or that I wanted to have sex with somebody that I shouldn't want to have sex with. There was no rhyme or reason. There was no warning. It would come out of absolutely nowhere. And you have to receive it and deal with it. And as a child, clearly, I did not know what that was. For me personally, I am considered more purely O, it's called. So more purely obsessive. I had compulsions, but they were super easy to hide. One of them was washing my hands. I remember specifically, and this is a really strange one, sitting in my room in high school thinking that if I didn't poke a hole in my windowsill, something would happen to my parents. There's no connection. There was nothing wrong with my parents. It wasn't like I knew they were ill or something. It was out of nowhere. Nina, if you don't poke a hole in your windowsill, mom's going to die or dad's going to die. And so I would take my old school protractor and I would poke a hole in my windowsill. And I was like, whew, okay, we're good. Compulsions really weren't much of a thing for me. The harder part with that is that a lot of my suffering was in my head, which I think is pretty much true for most people with OCD, but it was like living in a silent hell. On the outside, I was actually very quote unquote normal, totally normal family. There's no horrible trauma as a child. I was very, very lucky. And I remember, and this sounds really dark, Rachel, but I remember seeing a therapist one time and they didn't say OCD. They said that I was a very anxious kid or I care too much about what other people think. One psychologist told my mom, you have a very imaginative daughter. That was my diagnosis. I remember at one point saying out loud that sometimes I wished that I had some sort of abuse or trauma to make sense of why these thoughts were happening. Because without that, I felt that this was my fault. I bought this on myself. Like, what if these thoughts really are mine? What if I really want to have these thoughts? And again, that's how OCD works. It preys on your most vulnerable thoughts. It usually focuses on the people that you love the most. So I would never have any intrusive thoughts about strangers. So talk about fascinating. I wasn't like, oh, look at that woman or guy over there. I want to hurt him. Intrusive thoughts are about the people that you love and care about, which makes them that much more painful to deal with. It wasn't until maybe ninth grade where I wasn't going to the bathroom. I was not regular and I was always nauseous. And they thought I was lactose intolerant. And I went to the doctor and he pushed on my stomach and he said, I can literally feel dried stool in your intestines. You have a very nervous stomach. I'm going to put you on Prozac. Talk about how far-fetched the diagnosis was and the medication choice. It was really like, maybe you're depressed. We're going to give you Prozac and maybe that will help your stomach. We didn't know any better. I was happy. I thought this was going to cure everything. And I was on Prozac for about a year, being treated for something that I did not have. Nobody who knew me would ever say Nina was a depressed kid. I was as crazy as I am now, just fun and outgoing. I just love to have a good time. I kept thinking to myself, maybe I'm just depressed. After a year or so on Prozac, nothing changed. It became one medication after another. That didn't work. Let's try this. That didn't work. Let's try this. And I ended up going to another primary care. I don't know if I said something that my hands are really dry or something that he picked up on. And he asked me, how many times a day do you wash your hands? Now, at that point, I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with what I'm here for? And I'll never forget, Rachel, it was 27 times. Now, I'm 40 years old. So this was when I was about 16. And I remember I went through my day. I wash my hands when I wake up. I wash my hands before breakfast and after breakfast, before I brush my teeth, after I brush my teeth, before my shower, after my shower. I really thought that I was just being really clean. Like I just didn't want germs on me. So it made sense. And he said, I think you have obsessive compulsive disorder. And the words hit me. I thought I was ill. First of all, disorder. What? Like I'm normal. I don't have a disorder. I'm fully functional. You think I belong in a loony bin. I was not happy. And even then, Rachel, I didn't even receive OCD targeted therapy. I didn't go on the right medication until my late 20s, which is really common with OCD. A lot of times diagnosis doesn't even happen into your 20s because the shame. How easy is it to go into a therapist and say, oh, I thought about having sex with a family member, or I thought about hurting my boyfriend. It's a horrifying thing. None of those thoughts are ever aligned with actually who you are, which is why it's so debilitating.
Wow, that's heartbreaking. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. Did the medication help?
Yes, it has been a lifesaver. I'm on venlafaxine or Effexor, which is actually really common for anxiety. The doctor that had prescribed it said, you are textbook OCD. I remember, Rachel, feeling like a huge weight was lifted, like I wasn't different. I wasn't special. I was almost like a boring case of OCD, and I couldn't have felt more free in that moment. I think the biggest shift for me was I was in the psychiatrist's office for the 15-minute medication management visit. And he said, what are you most proud of yourself? You're so hard on yourself, yet you've accomplished so much. I've always had very, very healthy relationships in my life. I've had jobs. Nobody would ever know. I wasn't dysfunctional or unable to function because of it. I hid it very well. I think that was so exhausting. I said, I think my biggest strength is the fact that I've gotten through life successfully, my version of success with OCD. And I thought he was going to be super proud of me and cheer me on. Like, you're right. That's a tough task. That's a pretty solid feat you have there. And instead, he said, you've got to be kidding me. And at first I was offended. I think I've spent my whole life maybe getting attention, even though it was negative. It was like my identity was, oh, Nina with OCD. Nina, you have OCD. That he stripped that. I didn't know myself without OCD. And I think that was a big turning point. And he said, Nina, I just want you to know the other side of this is that a lot of the patients that I see that have OCD, they won't let me walk into their hospital room without performing a ritual. So the fact that you have never been hospitalized, nobody would know. You actually hid this your whole life. I'm not impressed. If that's the badge of honor you're wearing, that's embarrassing. And it was an ego hit, but a really, really good one. And I never felt so empowered. Like, wow, here's somebody who sees OCD patients all the time. He's a psychiatrist, so he sees everything. And he just told me that I wasn't a big deal, that my case of OCD was actually not impressive. And he said, Nina, if you look up OCD, there's literally categories listed and you fall into most of them. Like, you're so common with this disorder that I'm bored with your thoughts. To be able to say something that has terrified you your whole life, your thoughts, and actually, first of all, verbalizing them is horrific. And then to be met with, that's it. Those are the thoughts that you're full of shame. And I'm like, yeah, those are horrible. And he's like, yeah, I'm not impressed. Not only are you so boring, but like I have patients that would blow you out of the water. And that was a big, big turning point for me. Most of my adult life, I never talked about OCD because I really didn't associate it with it anymore. It wasn't, I'm Nina. And the way my brain works is actually what has made me Nina. But that was a first for me. And that was in my early 30s, 10 years ago. It wasn't that long ago.
You have said that it's an unexpected brain gift. You showed symptoms so early on, no one really understood and didn't catch it. Now you're able to have that self-awareness, and you're also able to get over the guilt and the embarrassment and fear about your OCD, which makes you a great sex therapist because you are not judgmental. And people can talk openly with you. You've had all these unusual, disturbing thoughts yourself. And so you're not going to judge anyone and nothing shocks you. How does that allow your clients to open up to you?
So I'm a sex coach, not a therapist.
Sex coach sounds a lot sexier.
Right. Yeah. But I also want to give therapists the credit because they dive deep into painful things. Although I do, and it's a part of the journey. I'm coaching a gentleman right now with serious sexual trauma. And I told him, I am happy to coach you, but I will not do that unless I know that you are seeing a trauma-informed, sex-positive therapist. And he's like, oh, I've been in programs my whole life for that. Trust me. And he's amazing. And his self-awareness has made my job so much easier and so much more fun because it can get really dark, Rachel. Our sexuality, our mental health are two of our most core, primal human things that make us who we are. It's hard to exist if one or both are not healthy. Anyone who has spoken to me will tell you the judgment-free zone, the things that people tell me, the kinks they have, the fetishes they have, the thoughts that they have. It's so important for me that they know they will be met with exactly what I needed my whole life. And that was to be told that you're okay just as you are. Your thoughts are okay. Your desires are okay. We've had some difficult conversations. I went into this really focusing on the fun stuff about sexuality and relationships. I would coach people on, I've never had a sex toy. Which one should I get? And those were great conversations. Or my husband and I have been together for 20 years. We're bored. We want to try swinging. And I'm like, cool, let's talk. Those are the uplifting, fun ones. And then I kind of found myself also attracting people who were experiencing religious shame. As an adult, 40s, 50s, men who have never orgasmed from penetrative intercourse with a female, or I should say, a vagina owner. People don't talk about this stuff, especially men. Men aren't allowed to have any feelings or ever not be in the mood. Our society tells us so many horrible things about our sexuality. It's no wonder we're so confused. I had made a statement on a video that I had done, and it hit home for some people, and they messaged me afterwards, and I said, the reason why I'm so passionate about mental health and sexuality, and the reason why I've literally devoted my career and my life to this, is because when you think about it, people take their own lives and the lives of others based on those two things. So people take their own life when they struggle with their mental health or with their sexuality. People have killed other people because either their mental health was not in the right place, or the hate crimes that have ended in death. A large part of my career is fun. I try to keep it as light and just politically incorrect. I'm all over the place because I'm just real. But underneath all the laughter and underneath all the ridiculous memes that I post or the jokes is truly a passion for saving people from themselves, because I've been there and I know what it feels like to feel different and broken. And I don't feel that way anymore. Had I not gone through that, had I not been born with OCD, I could never be in a position to hear some of the stuff that I do and not be fazed and be able to be that person for somebody else, to get off the phone with me and go, oh my gosh, I just said the most shame-filled thing I have ever had in my brain. And I was just told I was okay. That saved my life. Not to sound dramatic, but I want to be that for other people.
And I'm sure your clients definitely feel that genuineness. How does one become a sex coach?
I kind of fell into it. I was in network marketing for a little while on the side, just making some extra money. And it was with a wellness company. And so I would be talking to a lot of people with body image issues. And that conversation always turned into something having to do with mental health, or that their body image was impacting their relationship, that they haven't had an orgasm in a really long time, whatever it was. And I found myself not really talking about the program that I was coaching people on more than I was talking about real stuff. My education is in mental health and sexuality. So it isn't like this, that the passion came out of nowhere, but I had no idea the pain people were experiencing based on either mental health or sexuality. And they're really intertwined, Rachel. It's very hard to have problems with your sexuality or accepting your sexuality and have it not impact your mental health, or having a relationship that doesn't feel really good without affecting your mental health. It's all connected. So I started saying, all right, let me do some workshops. So I would do virtual, like $5, come on a Zoom with me. We'll talk about how to communicate in relationships. I would do workshops in people's homes pre-COVID about sexual pleasure and how societal messages mess us all up. And I was having a blast. And then I was like, I can do this. I know the psychology behind letters after your name. I don't necessarily agree with it, because some of the most influential people I have ever known didn't even go to college. I'm not downplaying the importance of a degree. I'm still paying my graduate school loan off, so I understand. But I knew that if people were going to take me more seriously, I should do a program. I took a course. It was about 60 hours, and that's how I got the certification. Whether or not I'm certified shouldn't impress you or make you assume that I'm the best coach for you. That's why I always offer a discovery call. It's about 15, 20 minutes. Some have lasted an hour, but it's free. And I just get on the phone with you and find out what you're looking for. And we have to see if you're comfortable with me. My personality is very bold, and that might not work for everybody, and that's okay. I offer free things now and then just to give people a glimpse into crazy Nina and see if they're comfortable with my unfiltered, imperfect, unashamed. I lay it out there and I joke and say, if you ever leave one of my events without saying at least one time, I cannot believe she just said that, then I'm not doing my job. I'm here to talk about things that people don't talk about and what is going to be uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me sometimes. So that's how it all kind of happened. I've always loved it. This is something that I'm so passionate about. I've written articles for adult websites and I've done toy reviews and all of that fun stuff. Really, my gift now is what I hated the most about myself my entire life has turned into the one thing that has led me to love my brain. Not to say that I don't have really hard times, Rachel. I'm not going to lie and say that I don't have intrusive thoughts anymore. They're few and far between. I will say that COVID, I definitely had a bit of a second wind of it, and I dealt with it promptly because I'm aware, but it's the unexpected gift that I wanted to end my life over multiple times. And now I don't think I could ever serve people the way I serve them now and in the capacity that I serve them now had I not experienced all of that.
You're showing your vulnerability by sharing that you've had all these intrusive thoughts allows other people room and space to come forward. What type of people are coming to you and what are they coming to you needing?
Another reason why I love what I do is it's never the same. So if I were to list all the clients, I can tell you right now, even just 4 off the top of my head, they all are completely different. I had a woman come to me, married for 20 years, kids, great solid friendship in their marriage, but they were both really bored and wanted to try swinging. And they had absolutely no idea where to start. I always say that I don't have to practice what my clients practice. I don't have to think that it's also good for my marriage. I meet people where they are. This isn't about me. So I'll have people go, well, so you coach people who want to swing. That must mean that you're no, just like a therapist that helps somebody with OCD doesn't have to have OCD. They wanted to swing. So I coached her for close to a year. And I will say that by the end of that, they had not yet done it. I have no issues with swinging. I completely understand why people are attracted to that lifestyle. That's fine. To jump into it from going from, I think it'd be really hot to let's go to a swingers club, you're missing like B through Y. You just jump from A to Z. I need to coach you starting at B. And then I would ask questions like, have you ever watched porn together? No. Okay. Have you ever discussed other attractive people? Not celebrities. I'm talking about real people that you both know. Have you ever talked about, are you attracted to them? Have you ever had fantasies about other people? Nope. Okay. So you're not even sure how you'll react if either of you says, oh, that person's really hot. No, I think it'd be fine though. Okay, well, thinking it would be fine and actually having it be fine are very different. If my job is to help relationships, I felt like it was my moral obligation to say, look, if you want to end up swinging, awesome. You guys might love it. But before that happens, let me do my due diligence before you take another step. There's so many things you can do before involving anybody else to take it really slowly. That was one. I had a guy that I was telling before could never orgasm from a female partner, no oral, manual, nothing. He had to finish it himself. And of course, jokingly, I said, welcome to being a woman. But he was very distraught, like, I think something's wrong. And I'm also really, really big on social constructs and societal messages. So I will challenge belief systems. My question was, how is this negatively impacting your life? And he was quiet. I said, do you have girlfriends? Yes. Do you enjoy being sexual with them? Yes. Has it ever caused a breakup? No. Is there shame when that happens? No. So what you're telling me is that, like most of us, you're a victim of messages from our society that say men are supposed to be able to orgasm from penetration. The problem is that you're receiving messages that are going against what your truth is about your sexuality, and that's causing conflict. By the end of the call, I had said so many amazing things about how great it is that you don't come from penetration. Like, there are women that would be like, oh, I wish this guy could last forever because maybe it takes the woman a really long time. And I said, do you realize that men take pills to have what you have naturally? It wasn't that he couldn't orgasm. It's just he couldn't orgasm from specific acts. I just turned the whole thing around and he's like, what just happened? I was like, what just happened was no one's ever challenged you. You've never challenged yourself on these belief systems. Just because they don't work or they're not aligned with you doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It means there's something wrong with the message. That's not your story. Write your own. We're so unique sexually, but with media, it makes everyone feel like we're all supposed to orgasm the same way, have sex the same way, have the same type of relationship. And if you go out of that box, that's where that inner conflict comes in. I have another one who has a sexual trauma, and he has a specific acts on women that he's uncomfortable doing, but he wants to. And so working with his therapist and then working with me is working through that. I work with people who have recently gotten a divorce and are in their 50s and they're going back to dating and they have absolutely no idea what's going on. It's really anything. And that's what I love. It's always a challenge for me. It keeps me on my toes.
You are constantly asking great questions that get people thinking about sexuality in different ways and thinking outside the box, reframing what they might think it needs to be. How do your parents and your husband feel about you talking so openly about sexuality? And do your kids have any idea what you do for a living?
My children do not know. They know I'm a relationship coach. And to be honest with you, that's pretty much what it is. My daughter knows what sex is. She's overheard me on certain podcasts. And because I am who I am, I'll ask her, what did you hear? What questions do you have? Sometimes she probably has questions but denies it, but she's curious. I tell her, look, you can ask me anything. The only thing I can promise you is that I'm going to give you an age-appropriate answer. And if there is no age-appropriate answer, we're going to have to table it for a little bit and we'll come back to it when you've hit that age. But I will never keep anything from you. They're not going to get the education in school. So it's my job. My son, he really doesn't care. Mommy's a relationship coach, a speaker, a writer. That's what they know. My husband, I've always been open. So he'll say, I know what I married. I know who you were when I married you. You know, I've always been not afraid to be outside the box. My parents are amazing and very supportive. I write erotica sometimes under a pen name. I wouldn't expect my dad to buy those. I'm an adult now. Had I been doing this at 18, it might have been a little weird. But I think the more comfortable I am with it, it's hard for other people to be uncomfortable with it. I try to do a good job of explaining the psychology behind what I do. It's not just talking about vibrators all day. It's some dark stuff. And I think also sometimes when they hear me speak about certain topics, I think that they look into their own marriage and go, shit, we dealt with that at some point, especially when I talk about communication. That was probably the downfall for my parents.
That leads us into the next question. Tell us what happened after your parents were married for 40 years.
This is the first time, Rachel, I have ever spoken publicly about this. And I made sure to ask my parents. They're very private people. And I'm excited, nervous, but excited because I don't think a lot of people talk about the impact that a divorce has on adults. We always hear about how it impacts children, but adult children of divorced parents, it's a whole other ball game. Growing up, we had a perfect family. I know that that's impossible, but to be honest with you, that's what it felt like. It really did. Like I said, both of my parents came from families that didn't really talk. My dad was from a very traditional Italian family. He was the oldest. He was the star athlete and he could never show emotions. That was a big no-no, right? And he always had to have things under control and nothing was supposed to bother him. And he took that label his entire life. My mother came from a fairly wealthy family. They had a maid and a nanny. My mom was probably raised more by her nanny than my grandparents, and they never really talked. I think my mom went through some really dark years, and I don't think that ever was spoken about in the family. Maybe they started as great friends, but I think they became amazing at the business of marriage. And I talk about this a lot with people in general and to my clients. Having been with my husband for 17 years, I get it. You become really good at the business of marriage. And what I mean by that is you manage the home very well. You are able to provide for your family, whether you're struggling or not. I found out later in life that my parents struggled financially in the first half of their marriage. I had no idea. They kept the lid on. We would go to school. They would help us with our schoolwork. If we had friend issues, they would help us with our friend issues. We didn't want for anything. They were great at family traditions. We grew up with a really tight family and a tight extended family as well, which is really important and not very common. They were great at being business partners in the marriage. They were affectionate. We saw them kiss. It never grossed us out. There was, I love you. There were butt smacks. I'm convinced that when my father's parents passed away, my dad kept it together and held that label of the star kid. I'm a lawyer and I can provide and I have a great marriage. Both of his siblings had been through a divorce. My dad was the one that they were proud of. And my dad would never let them think otherwise. No matter what my dad was going through, whether personally or within the marriage, I don't think anything would have changed while my grandparents were still alive. He held on to that label so strong that when his parents passed away, the curtains went down and he was by himself. Like the audience wasn't there anymore. And he was kind of like, I don't even know who I am. I don't even know if I love my job. My dad's an amazing attorney. Doesn't mean he loves it. And he went through I don't want to say midlife crisis, but through like, who am I? I don't even like my job. And is this the marriage that I've always thought of? And am I the father that I always thought I was supposed to be? And I think that hit him very hard, which in turn obviously hit them both. I don't think either of them were aware of this. This is just my psychobabble, but I've told them this and they didn't say that I was wrong. It was the first time they were hearing a different idea as to what happened. And I think the last 8 to 10 years of their marriage, when my grandparents passed away, they started to grow apart. And when you start to grow apart, insecurities rise. Passive aggressiveness seems to be the mode of communication. My sister and I have been out of the house for so long that you look at yourself and you look at your partner when your kids are gone, like, who are you again? So I always tell couples, some people might object, but that's okay. Your children shouldn't be the center of your universe because those kids are going to grow up and you're going to be left with your spouse. And then what? Your kids are going to have their own family one day or their own life one day. What are you going to do? Most of us are guilty of that. About 3-4 years ago, I got a phone call over Easter break from my father. I always joke, we're very close. I love him. I'm such a daddy's girl. But I think a lot of our relationship was through my mom. I didn't always talk directly to my dad. It was just he knew what was going on because of my mom. And he called me. I was like, hey, Dad. And I could just tell his voice was weird. And I was like, what's going on? And he lost it, Rachel. I've seen and heard my dad cry twice in my life. One was my wedding day, and those were happy tears. And then on the phone that day. And he didn't just cry, he sobbed and said, you know, things haven't been going great with me and Ma, and I'm going to be moving out. And I remember totally compartmentalizing. I go into business mode and then I process it after the fact and usually kind of crash a couple days later. I was trying to be there for my dad and my parents. He was so worried about hurting the family. It wasn't an angry split. I think that's what made it even more painful. And the guilt was overwhelming. You're talking 4 decades. I remember getting off the phone and I just stood there trying to keep it together. Like, what just happened? Now here I have 2 kids who live and breathe for my parents, especially my dad. And I was like, I'm not going to tell them anything about this. And my dad ended up moving into an apartment. And my mom moved to Connecticut and lived with her cousin for a while. And I kind of benefited from that. I was really close to my mom geographically since high school. That went on for about a year or 2. We ended up getting as used to it as we can, but they never lost touch. They had officially divorced. They were still in each other's lives. We went on family vacation together. I mean, it was a very bizarre situation. The hardest thing I struggled with, Rachel, was one, that initial feeling of, oh my gosh, was everything I ever thought was real isn't. I felt like the rug was yanked out. And then I internalized and said, if my parents can't make it, why am I even wasting my time? I told my husband, I'm scared now. My parents had such a solid foundation. If they can't make it, I want to know now if you and I are going to make it, because I don't want to be 70 starting all over. I want to start over at 35 or however old I was when that was going on. It really impacted my marriage, my view of marriage. I also started to see my parents as imperfect. And there was a mourning process. You live your whole life thinking your parents are perfect, not even just together, but as people. They don't have any broken pieces. I was grieving the loss of my parents as I knew them for 30 some odd years. And that was super painful. I ended up developing a very different relationship with both of them. The silver lining is that my relationship with both of them is so much closer, because for those 2 or 3 years, if I wanted to talk to my dad, I had to call my dad. My dad always wanted to protect us, even emotionally. And I think once that was out, he was like, can't hide it anymore. And he just became a human. And our relationship is so different now, and it's great. And my relationship with my mom is great. The amazing ending to this story is that they stayed in touch and started to be for each other who they probably should have been for the last 40 years, but they learned the worst already happened. So let's just take off any masks we have and be exactly who we are for each other. No fears, no passive aggressive. We're going to communicate. They both decided they're not going to settle anymore for what didn't make them happy before. So let's just have it out. And that relationship grew and grew and grew. And then we were on summer vacation and I was outside with my dad. And me being me, starting the conversations that people probably try to avoid, I said, Dad, have you found happiness? Because that's truly above it all really what I want for you. And he said, yeah. I was like, oh, great. And he goes, with your mom. And my dad's not an emotional guy. He was never allowed to be. He is now. And so he said, Nina, I dated. I had fun. I enjoyed parts of it. But I'm realizing that the happiest I've ever been has been with Ma. And so I said, have you told Mom? And he said, yeah. So I was like, are you guys talking about getting back together? And he said, yep. So of course I was like, Ma, why didn't you tell us? He was like, I didn't want to get anybody excited. I don't want to get married again. It's stupid. It's pointless. So that went on for about a year. I said, why don't I just get ordained and marry you guys? And my mom and dad were like, yes, do it. I got ordained online for $40 and 5 minutes later. And we had a wedding ceremony at my house last December 26th, the day after Christmas. My sister and I wrote all this stuff and I did the wedding for them. They had a first dance. They wrote their own vows. And hearing the vows, Rachel, knowing what we know now and knowing what I know now about marriage was the realest, most honest vows. None of that fairy tale BS. It was the realization of how difficult this can be, and we're not letting go. We're going to do this. And they have become best friends. They're now living together 20 minutes from my house here in Connecticut.
A happy ending.
Who can say I married my parents? What an ending. Wow. The good things I learned is I'm not going to keep my mouth shut if something's bothering me. I would rather know now if it's not going to work than when I'm 70. And so I have the difficult conversations with my husband. I'm a huge cheerleader for having difficult conversations. That's the only way you're going to grow.
Wow, Nina. Honestly, for the listeners that can't see, my smile was literally ear to ear as I was tearing up. Your mom and dad had that space to be authentic. Your dad became more emotional and your mom probably had spaced away to be with her cousin, and they came back and they knew what they wanted. That's a beautiful gift. That happened to my friend who divorced her husband and remarried him and is happily married. And I interviewed her too. She's an actress. Her name's Rena Sofer. It doesn't always work out that way. And I do appreciate you bringing up the idea of how hard it is for adult children, how it pulled the rug out from underneath you. That's a common thing I've heard. My best friend, Rachel, told me the same thing when her parents got divorced and she was an adult. We're talking about relationships. It is so important to be authentic and have those difficult conversations. We're going to jump back into sexual coaching now. You talk a lot about sex drive and sexual desire. Why is it so important for us to understand our sex drive?
Sex drives are really important. It's one of the most common complaints in especially heterosexual relationships. Over 80% of heterosexual couples will report that there are some mismatched sex drives. And understandably so, for the most part, biological women and biological men are actually wired a bit differently. Very similar parts, but they just work in a different way. One of the things that I always hear is my partner lost their sex drive. You hear this a lot about women. So the husbands will go, Nina, my wife lost her sex drive. And every time I hear that, I'm like, okay, it isn't that she lost it. It's that we've never been taught how sex drive works. There's two different types of sex drive. There's a sex drive that most men, not all, but most, will experience, which is more of a spontaneous desire. They can be walking down the street and all of a sudden get horny. They think of sex. For many women, it's more of a response to something. It's more of, doesn't necessarily come on out of nowhere. It's more of my sex drive isn't going to be tapped into until somebody touches me, or there's dirty talk, or we watch porn together. It's a response to a sexual stimuli versus no sexual stimuli is present and I'm really horny. The numbers are what they are. And most women will report more of a responsive desire. Most men will report more of a spontaneous desire, but there are men that experience responsive, women that experience spontaneous, and there are a lot of us that actually do both. Depends on the day. I could be walking to the grocery store and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I could really go for whatever. But not understanding that, it's so easy to say she lost her sex drive. My question is always, if you just got a new Benz and I give you the key to a Jeep Cherokee and I go, enjoy your car, and it doesn't work, you're going to look at me and go, why are you giving me the key to a Jeep Cherokee? This is a Benz. You're not going to say, my Benz doesn't work. You're going to say, you gave me the wrong key. With sex drives, it's the same thing. It isn't that she lost her sex drive or that he lost his sex drive. It's that you're using the wrong key. Sexuality in general has been taught from a male perspective forever. That's why women come to me saying, I can't have an orgasm through penetration alone. What's wrong with me? And I was like, absolutely nothing is wrong with you. What's wrong with anything is the messages that are incorrect about orgasms for women. To understand how they work, how do you get turned on? What do you need to get turned on? You'll hear the cliche of, we were in bed and it was late, the kids are finally asleep, so I rolled over and I rubbed her arm and I was like, I really want to have sex. And she was like, I don't want to. So I'm going, of course she doesn't want to. You didn't turn the key. Touching her shoulder and saying that you're horny is really not going to work for most women. It's not that she doesn't have a sex drive. It's that you're using a Jeep Cherokee key in a Benz. Understanding can help to eliminate the guilt and the shame that comes along from both partners. Whether you have the higher drive or the lower drive or the different drive, everybody is impacted negatively when there's this mismatch and it becomes this resentful mess. That is something that is so crucial, is to understand how your own sex drive works and then being able to explain it to your partner, specifically how to explain what you need.
That makes a lot of sense. It also probably stops feelings from being hurt. So people don't take it personally and can work towards finding common ground. What are some common barriers to sexual desire?
Your everyday stress. So obviously finances, jobs, kids. A therapist once told me, and it sounds a little harsh, but it's true. She said, kids are great for families and they are horrible for marriage. It's true. When do you get alone time? When are you not stressed about what your kids are going through? And when you first have a baby, for the woman, that's tough. Your body's changed, your hormones are all over the place, you're tired, you're not sleeping. If you're breastfeeding, your boobs are no longer sexual. There's a lot that happens. Communicating about what's keeping you from being turned on is really important, and thinking outside the box. Maybe it does require a babysitter. Maybe it does require date nights in. When COVID hit, we couldn't go out anymore. And absolutely took a toll on our sex drive, 100%. And so we said, we have to implement something because this is not working. And it was date nights in. Our kids are a little bit older, so when they go to sleep, they actually just go to sleep. They're not like a newborn that's waking up every hour. But when they went to sleep, we went downstairs, grabbed a drink, and played a game or watched a movie or just had fun conversation. It was to remind you that you're still sexual, you're still a partner in a romantic relationship, and you're going to have to work at reducing the barriers. If a glass of wine helps, go for it. This is not a time to judge yourself.
What are your thoughts on scheduling sex? Because that feels so unromantic.
A lot of sex therapists and a lot of schools of thought will say that. And here's why. A lot of times there's a lot of fear and shame and embarrassment when there's always one partner initiating something. If it's always the woman saying, I really want to have sex, and being shot down, it becomes this wedge between you. The wife isn't going to want to say anything anymore, and she's going to be silently resentful. The husband feels bad because he's not, quote unquote, man enough to be horny all the time, like insert mega sarcasm. And it becomes this cycle of disconnect. So when you schedule sex, there's a few things that can happen. There is no worrying about who's going to initiate. Doesn't matter. You know it's going to happen. The other piece is knowing that you're going to want to get in the mood and activate that sex drive. You can do some things to plan. So for example, if you're really self-conscious about body hair, take care of it before your date night. If you know that Wednesday's your night, you can plan. All right, kids, we're going to babysit her. You can do things to yourself. That might mean you reading erotica on your phone while the kids are on their technology, you go on yours, and you're getting yourself to where you need to be so that when the time comes that you know is coming, no pun intended, that you are ready and you're expecting it. The truth is that could get messed up too. I can't tell you how many times my husband and I have been like, I cannot wait to get home. It's going to be so hot. And then one of the kids gets a stomach bug and vomits all over the place. Or a kid has a nightmare and comes in crying. And then I'm in their room and guess what? I'm not in the mood anymore. It happens. But I think scheduling sex forces you to do what you need to do to get in the headspace to be able to have sex. And I don't mean necessarily penetration. Sex can be anything. It's worth a try in every couple to see what kind of barriers it eliminates by scheduling it.
Explain to us what an orgasm gap is.
The orgasm gap is typically between heterosexual couples where statistically, biological males orgasm 90+% of the time they experience a sexual encounter. For biological women, it's like 60% maybe. And also throw in there that 75% of women or more fake an orgasm or have faked an orgasm. The gap does not really exist in homosexual couple, like gay, lesbian, or bi couples. It really doesn't exist this drastic. Men are orgasming 3 times as much. 30%. That's a big gap. A lot of it comes from our lack of education on how vaginas orgasm. We are expected to orgasm like men. And that is not how it works. I always shock people when I say, what's the equivalent of a penis on a woman? They will all say vagina. And I said, you're wrong. The clitoris is actually the equivalent of the penis, anatomically speaking and sexually speaking. The clitoris has 8,000 nerve endings. That's double what a penis. The only purpose of the clit is for pleasure. That's it. It's not for reproduction. Some people will say it's for reproduction anthropologically, but I digress. The truth is it's there for pleasure. When people think that you're supposed to orgasm from penetration because that's how a penis orgasms, so that must be how I do. The inner walls of the vagina have very few nerve endings. As painful as labor and delivery are, can you imagine if our actual vagina, the tunnel, was packed with nerve endings? We would die. The clit is seen as foreplay. When I speak to my guy friends or my guy clients, I say, can you imagine if a woman saw your penis as something to touch to get you in the mood, and then it stops, and then they start like rubbing your testicles or something and expect you to have an orgasm? Because that's really as ridiculous as it is for women. You'll stimulate our clit for foreplay, and then it stops and you go penetration and then the women feel forced like, oh, I guess I just got to fake it because I can't hurt the male ego. And you're teaching men the wrong thing. The women think they're broken because nobody ever talks about it. And this gap remains, and it will continue to remain unless we have these difficult conversations.
There's a lot of shame when it comes to sexuality. You started off talking about body image. Some of it comes when we're young, or maybe religious beliefs. I do wonder how our kids are going to grow up feeling sexually satisfied and not have all that baggage of watching porn that might be too aggressive or too harsh. We also have boys growing up now worrying about touching girls for fear that it's not going to be consensual. As parents, how do we teach our kids to not feel shame and to enjoy sexuality?
Speaking from experience, and even as somebody who's as open as I am about sex, and I do this for a living, when it comes to your own children, all bets are off. I royally screwed up. I mean, I just own that. It scared me. I was like, where are these questions coming from? And cover yourself when it's your child, especially your daughter, because there's this double standard that's still ingrained in my head as well. I have worked very hard in my own therapy and also just day-to-day living with my kids to try to help reverse that. Yes, our kids are growing up with porn being sex education. The good news is my daughter, whether I tell her or not, which I already have and I will continue to, will never not know what a clit is. Between the social media, there are so many feminist porn sites now. There are female influencers in the sexuality space that are so incredible. Porn is still big, but there's now different types of porn that are realistic that do not show orgasms unless they're real. They don't show all these aggressive things. It's not to say there's anything wrong with liking aggressive sex. That isn't the point. You can like whatever the heck you want. But if that's all these kids are seeing, then that's all they think exists. When my kids, and I'm not stupid, they'll grow up watching porn. That's okay when they get to the right age. I will tell them what sites to go to. Like, if you're going to watch this anyway, at least give me the opportunity to show you the ones that are realistic. I even tell my clients, watch homemade porn. Literally, if you're searching, search homemade. Not amateur, not regular ones, because what you're going to see is bleached buttholes, no pubic hair, fake boobs, and orgasming from penetration in like 5 minutes. That's what you're going to see. And that's what you're going to believe is accurate. And then you're going to wonder why your partner can't do that. It's because the people in the videos aren't doing that either. With my kids, my daughter especially, it was very hard for me to bridge over the gap of sex is to have babies. Maybe as a little kid, that's fine. But if they really ask, but if they don't want babies, do they just not have sex? Yeah, I wanted to vomit when she asked me, but I looked at what I've been through and what most of the female clients and male, and anybody in between that comes to me, I see what those messages do later in life. So I'll say, no, adults that are in love. And yes, I do say that, even though casual sex is totally fine, but at 11 years old, you could hold off on that conversation. That's okay.
I said the same thing.
Yeah.
For the first conversation. Yeah.
When adults are in love, they do things to make each other feel good. I know the oral sex conversation is really tough because you don't have babies from that. So how do you explain why that happens? Because it feels good when you're in love and you're in a relationship with someone that you trust and you're old enough to understand the emotional and physical consequences. That's my answer. I don't want my daughter to ever think that the only role sex should play in her life is if she wants to have kids. I don't want her to ever feel that she has to have kids just because she has a uterus. As she gets older, it's a much easier conversation to have because you can reason with them. She asked me what sex was at 7. I always asked them back, what do you think sex is? Because they've heard it somewhere. So what do they hear about it?
And you only tell them what they need to know, as little information as possible. I remember seeing Dr. Berman, who is a sex therapist on Oprah years ago, advise parents to give their teenage daughters vibrators because she was saying that they should learn how to orgasm, that they should learn how to find pleasure, and that pleasure doesn't have to come from a boy, so they're not reliant on boys. And it seemed very controversial at the time. How do we talk to our teens about pleasure?
When they start getting into sexual relationships.
It's happening later and later.
Yeah, Yeah. But even if it's 15, 16, it's important to have the pleasure conversation. I don't care if you have a son, don't just talk to him about not getting her pregnant. That's not that difficult to do. So he's going to go, as long as I have a condom on, I've done my job. No, you have not done your job. Your pleasure is just as important as hers. Ask her what she wants. And unfortunately, most girls are not going to have an idea at 15 or 16, but have that conversation with your daughter. If you know they're in a sexual relationship, I know it's uncomfortable having that conversation. Do you know how to make yourself feel good? Kids have been masturbating since they're in the womb. It's really uncomfortable to talk to your kids about it, and don't wait for it to be comfortable because it's not going to be. It's going to be awkward, and it's really strange seeing your kids as sexual beings. As they get older, it does get a little easier to have these conversations. Most importantly, ask them what they've heard. My daughter's talking about how there's girls in her grade that are lesbians. She's in 6th grade. But I've been very open with my kids about LGBTQ+. That's a big deal for me. I want my kids to be allies. And we have a trans cousin, and they don't even flinch. When I first told them, they were very confused. They thought they lost their cousin. They didn't get it. But now they don't mess up any pronouns. It's such a natural thing. My kids are super accepting. I want my kids' generation to be unfazed. I can't wait until none of that is a thing.
I will say my daughters too, they're very understanding of gender fluidity. I learn a lot from them. Why is sexy an attitude, and how do you get into that mind frame?
There have been a number of occasions, I'm sure with most people listening, they have been attracted to somebody physically, and then they get to know them and they're like, even though physically they don't look any different, they're still hot, but that sexual attraction is just not there. The other way is true too. I have absolutely been sexually attracted to people that are not my quote unquote type physically, because they are funny, they are smart, they're flirtatious, they're sexual. That's an attitude. It's almost like you have that sexual connection with somebody and their body follows. You're just attracted to the whole person. When I say sexy is an attitude, does it help if physically people find you desirable? Well, sure, evolutionarily speaking. However, you can be the most stereotypically attractive person but you don't have that sex appeal. You don't have that attitude, that confidence. It's a turnoff. It doesn't matter what gender you are. I always ask people, what's in your underwear drawer? Because that is not that you have to go out and spend all this money on Victoria's Secret stuff. That isn't the point. It's more symbolic. What do you believe you deserve to feel like? If you look in your drawer and it's all period underwear or it's all boxer briefs with holes in them, do yourself a favor and start doing things to get your brain on board. Hey, I am sexy. And a sexy person, in my opinion, does X, Y, and Z. And then do that. Dance naked, not around anybody else. Like I always joke, I have a dance party every time I take a shower. I don't care if I have my period, if I've gained 10 pounds, I don't care. My twerk radio goes on Pandora and I dance naked. My husband isn't even in the room. And to be honest with you, he probably wouldn't be impressed anyway. Imagine an audience just paid to see your exact body type dance. You know, I always joke, I'm like, I should have a strip club that you have to have stretch marks, you have to have loose skin, and you have to have cellulite. Those are my criteria. You have to do these things to psych yourself up. And it might not be comfortable the first few times. You're going to pick your body apart because that's what our society has taught us to do. But eventually there's this empowering feeling. Also with social media, please unfollow accounts that are not aligned with your values, beliefs, and body type.
That make you feel bad.
Follow body neutral or body positive accounts. If you're watching porn, go ahead and search for porn that reflects the body type that you are most aligned with, because then you will see, wow, they are sexy and I look just like her. Surround yourself with things and people you are aligned with. That's my advice in every aspect of life. If you are surrounding yourself with people that you're not aligned with for whatever reason, you can unfollow people in real life too.
For me, I find sense of humor so attractive. That to me is a game changer. If you're feeling really good about yourself, you might feel more sexy. It's really a mind frame and you have to get there. Last two questions. If you could write your younger 20-year-old self a Dear Nina love letter, knowing everything you've learned up to this point, what would you say?
Recently, because of your prompt, I wrote one and I posted it on Facebook. It was super vulnerable and super scary. It was difficult to read and to write. But I would tell my 20-year-old self that you are not your thoughts and that your intrusive thoughts, your shame, your guilt, your fears are going to be your biggest, your greatest assets for the rest of your life. It will help you be a better parent. It will help you be a better spouse. It will help you be a better friend, and it will help you be a better professional. I would tell her that all of the pain that you have endured will end up providing you with a purpose in life, and that purpose will become your passion, and that passion will become your profession. And you will never, ever see the pain that you once had as anything other than exactly what you were supposed to have. I think that's what I would tell her.
I'm so honored that you wrote something that means a lot to me. I'm going to have to go back on Facebook and read it. And I will have links to your website and your social media. What brings you happiness? Do you have any happiness habits?
I should probably work on getting more, but I will say, and this sounds so dorky and probably totally scripted, but I can assure you there's nothing about me that's scripted, is what I do for a living. Being able to get off the phone, knowing that someone just came to me feeling ashamed and alone in their thoughts, or broken or weird or crazy, because all those feelings I'm very familiar with. And to get off the phone feeling like you're so okay and you're so awesome exactly where you're at. And I'm going to tell you why. That's what I do. My profession is cathartic. I would be lying if I said that there are no gains in it for me, because I heal every time I help somebody else heal. Building a business is not easy. It takes years to take off. And for someone like me, who's such an immediate gratification kind of a woman, the fact that years into it, I'm still pushing and I'm still growing a business and failing and troubleshooting and trying again is very telling to me. Aside from that, dogs and dark chocolate and obviously vibrators. I couldn't be happy without those.
Oh my God, I love it. You're true to your craft.
I got to practice what I preach. It's for business.
You're doing your research. This has been an amazing interview. Thank you so much, Nina.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This was awesome. The caliber of people you have on here are a big deal, and honored that you reached out.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you in person. Maybe one of these days we can have a tea party with our mom in person. Wouldn't that be amazing?
I would love it.
Well, you take care. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Nina.
Bye, Rachel.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.